Hi, everyone, and welcome back to this special collaboration with Julien Huez from the French Dispatch and Tristan, the Bourbon Parme. Is this right?
Yeah, kind of.
No, I got it wrong. No, yes. Wait, how do you say it? Exactly.
No, it's farm. You don't put an accent on the last Parme.
So I noticed one of Julian's followers was like, "Can he explain his name? What is your name? Because that's an Italian last name, isn't it?"
It is a mix of French and Italian. I'm sure when he was asking this, I'm pretty sure he knows what he's asking for.
Yeah.
Bourbon as a royal family in France, from Henri the Fourth to Louis the 14th. Then we are the kings in Spain. The current king is a Bourbon, and my branch is a branch going to Italy. Yeah, kind of. It's a kind of a mix like this.
I'm glad I asked. That was quite the trip. Guys, thanks so much for being here again. What an absolutely phenomenal 24 hours in your country. Julian, I guess straight to you. How much of a shock was this result? What is the result as of right now? And what led to it?
Honestly, a lot of people were expecting the worst. I mean, all of our followers are probably aware of the fact that we were also expecting the worst last week too. I mean, the polling was showing a majority for the RN, so the Rassemblement National, a small boost to the left wing, and then a complete collapse of the center. And instead, what's happened is you've seen the Nouveau Front Populaire, so the left wing coalition has taken the lead. So they are now the majority, for now, the majority group in the Assemblée Nationale, followed shortly by the Macronist Ensemble Liberal Coalition, which nobody expected to come in second place, followed in third place by the RN, who are boosted by a lot of dissidents from the Les Républicains. So honestly, it was a very surprising result. And to be honest, it's honestly a very, very positive result purely because it means that all of our fears were unfounded. And I believe the Rassemblement National only got, I think, a quarter of the total number of seats, Tristan, I think, or something just above that, maybe.
We'll come back to a couple of things there because I'm worried you're maybe a little bit too optimistic, Julian, based on some things I've been reading. But Tristan, what happens now in the French system?
You need to find a government. For this, you need to have parties offering, when the first coalition to the left will just said yesterday that they will discuss between themselves, because it's a coalition of different parties, going from the far left to centrist left, even you could say center right in a way. And then they will propose a name to Macron to say we would like this person to be prime minister. And then Macron has to agree to this. And then if they get along, they will have to go in the assembly, have a vote. And if he gets a vote by the majority of the MPs, we have a new government. That's how it's working.
And how long will that take?
And that's interesting, exactly. The thing is, as Julien just said, the center, so Macron's party and his coalition, in a way, got a big chunk of the vote. Maybe we'll come back on this afterwards because it's overestimating what people believe in France and trust them. But whatever, we'll come back on this later. But it means they're still powerful. So Macron is, in a way, one of the big winner in this kind of election because he still has a big power, even if he's asked a current prime minister to quit, and Gabriel Attal said, I'm quitting, and Macron just said today, I want you to stay until we have a stable government. They're still powerful because they can decide, okay, this prime minister from the left is too left-wing for us, or not enough left-wing. So they can say, if you're choosing someone from Mélenchon's party, which is the far left, for sure they will refuse him to be chosen and elected as a prime minister. So it means they still have lots of power. And even in the long term, in terms of policies, they will prevent, I think, the left, but we'll come back on this later, to go too left.
Okay, What led to this surprise result? Did Macron's vote unexpectedly hold up? And what were the tactics involved in making sure that people voted against the far right?
Exactly. The thing is, it was more against everybody. Well, the day of the election of the first round, the left-wing parties all said every time we're in one constituency, the far right is on the lead, and our candidate is on the third place, we will take him out of the equation. So he's quitting in a way, even if he's allowed to go on the second round, he's quitting to be sure that the centrist candidate number 2 can be elected. And that helped a lot. Of course, this is what helped the far right being not having the majority.
Mhm.
If this hadn't happened, and it happened in most of the constituencies where there was 3 candidates, if it didn't happen, the far right would have been in power today. They would have got the majority without even with the help of the right wing party, the Republicans, because as Julian said, like around between 10 and 15 of the MPs decided to join the far right.
Mhm.
So if there hasn't been this choice by the left, then followed by Macron and Gabriel Attal, who told the candidates, you have to leave. If you're third place, you have to leave. The far right will have been in power. But what it means is it helped, as we said last week, nobody likes Macron anymore. In the polls, he's below what Rishi Sunak was. So it means he's nowhere in politics. Gabriel Attal, the prime minister, is still a bit popular. So it helped a lot. And what is interesting is that yesterday after the result, it's not Macron who made a speech, it was Attal. Because
Yes.
people liked him much more. So it's, it's
But we
science, but
actually haven't heard from Macron still, have we?
no. And
I mean, that speaks volumes, doesn't it?
exactly. His absence from the scene speaks volume about his popularity, and he knows that if he was coming and telling something, people would take it badly, and it could compromise the chance of his party. Because, as I said, they're kingmakers in a way now. His parties, they won't be. The prime minister won't be from his party, that's for sure, because it would be his party is completely discredited, but he's still a kingmaker.
Okay. Beside all that, Julien, as someone who's from Renaissance, you see that result drop in the exit poll last night. What's the initial reaction for someone of your ilk? I mean, Macron made a big gamble. It seems to have worked, right? You're feeling pretty good about Macron, or what?
I mean, it's very much a complicated situation because, as Tristan explained, there was a lot of tactical voting, and if you even look at how a lot of the people from the parties voted, it gets even more interesting. So, for example, in a situation between LFI and the Rassemblement National, for example, only 43% of electors from my party actually voted in favor of La France Insoumise. You had 19% who voted for the RN, you had 38% who abstained entirely. Same thing with the LR, only 26 of them voted for LFI and 36 of them abstained, while 38 voted for the Les Républicains. And it was a bit bigger and fewer voters for the RN in the case that there was the Parti Socialiste and all this kind of stuff. So there's lots of complicated movements that took place in general, in all honesty, and so it's going to take us a while to go through all of the data to figure out what's happening. But there were some results that gave us a lot of things to be very happy about. So, for example, if you look at the results from last night, the RN lost re-election in 6 of their seats, including one of their strongholds up in the north near Lille, and quite a few in the Massif Central down south and on the west coast of France. So on that front, you got a lot of positive noise. On top of that, simply the fact that our vote didn't collapse entirely was just huge, even if a lot of that was down to tactical voting, because we were expecting bad results as low as, I think, 100 seats, Tristan, 90 seats. And the fact that we've almost got 200 to the point that, for example, if the Nouveau Front Populaire want to get rid of the far-right La France Insoumise, you could have a very strong, quote-unquote, centrist position with everybody from Europe Écologie Les Verts or even the PCF, all the way to some of the more moderate people of the Les Républicains, which is why Emmanuel Macron is inviting a lot of the more moderates from Les Républicains to have dinner with him at the Élysée tonight to figure out what they're thinking and what they want to do. But I mean, honestly, it's not even just being happy for my party, because I'm still a social liberal. I still have some affinity with the PS and the center left, even if I'm a former member of Les Républicains from back in the day. It's just the fact that we don't have the far right in power, and French governance can continue in a way that is more positive and is actually, in my view, more representative of the general French public than the RN would have been with their cast of cranks and crazy candidates.
Okay, I want to come back to the far right in a second, but tell me, Julien, about some of these, I guess, more extreme characters in French politics. You've got two that you want to single out. Who are they, and what does this mean for them, what happened last night?
First of all, you've got Jean-Luc Mélenchon, who is the left-wing's boogeyman, because he is one of the, he is the least popular politician in France. He has been the least popular politician in France for several years.
Why?
And
is it a style thing, or his policies, or both?
It's not only a style thing, because he's quite vulgar and violent, even if his team basically wrote him in. I mean, there's a famous scene that was published in Quotidien several years ago, where he was screaming at some security officers during a search of his party's premises, screaming, "Do you know who I am? I am the Republic, get out of my way," and all this kind of stuff, to the point that it basically became a very, very prominent meme in French politics. And he's a very unpopular person, to the point that his party were trying to sideline him themselves. And then on the other side, sort of almost at the level of the Rassemblement National, well, he is basically a part of them now. But another man is the soon-to-be former president of Les Républicains, Eric Ciotti, who basically has been dragging the center-right party to the right for several years now. He was working in concert with Laurent Wauquiez because they thought that they could capture the votes from the far right and rebuild the right in their image and all this kind of stuff, which is nonsense. And when he unilaterally decided that the party was going to ally with the far right, he triggered a succession of catastrophic internal infighting, which included scenes of him locking himself into the office, waving out of his window a la Michael Jackson when he had Paris in his hands and was dangling her out of a window, and then triggered several attempts to kick him out of the party. And then comical scenes where he was in a courtroom. Well, no, his lawyer was in the courtroom, followed by another lawyer from Les Républicains and another lawyer from Les Républicains trying to keep the peace between everybody, where you had one team of people fighting each other that ended up getting kicked out of a courtroom because nothing that they were doing was making any sense, and it was just the prosecutor just said, "You know what, get out, like just go away, leave."
You are reassuring me so much. As someone from Australian politics, it warms my heart that you guys are just as mad.
We are a dramatic people. Listen, don't let anybody tell you otherwise. We are a very dramatic people.
So there's another character, Francois Hollande. He's back. Tristan, is he going to play any significant role, or is this just an old-timer kind of back on the scene for one last go?
I think the main aim of his comeback is to give credibility to the left-wing coalition. He said yesterday on TV he didn't want to be prime minister, for sure. But he was even implied he didn't want to be minister, but just to be an help if the government needs some help on foreign affairs or foreign issues. Because he said, I have experience with foreign leaders, I could help. And okay, it doesn't mean he could be foreign secretary, you never know. But at least he doesn't want to have the top job. And I'm not even sure he will get such a high position. But so he's just there for credibility. I think it works. So he's quite still unpopular among the right because people believed he ruined France in a way. I mean, the reputation of France, reputation of his position, of the presidential position, and he's despised by the far left, who is saying that he was much too centrist and even right wing on economic issues. But he brings credibility to a coalition who didn't have much, and to say, okay, guys, if I am ready to get to ally and to have be in coalition with the far left, it means they are not as extreme as you pretend they are. And it helped a lot, even if exactly what Julien said, when the people from Les Républicains, so for the right-wing party, or from Macron's party, had to vote for the far left, they were really mixed. And they were like, okay, some of them went for it saying, my main issue is to have the far right out of power. But some were like, I can't vote for the left ever. It's like it's over my ability. So is abstain, or they voted for the far right. It happens quite a lot. And there's something interesting also with the far left is just before the election, they kicked four of the MPs. Mélenchon kicked four of the MPs of his parties, and so they went they became independent candidates, and they had against them someone from their own party, the previous party, and among those four, three got elected, which shows exactly what Julien said: is that Mélenchon is hated in France, and even if you're kicked out of his party, you can be elected and you can get more votes than the people from your own party, from your previous party. You know what I mean? So it's quite interesting.
Okay, guys, I need to ask the burning question. Why are there so many damn parties?
Well, I mean, I personally think that it's a positive thing that shows that we have a very dynamic and we have a big variety of different views in France, to be honest.
It's ungovernable, isn't it?
Not necessarily, because to be honest, I mean, for example, at a surface level, if you look at, for example, the Greens and the PS, you would assume that they conflict with one another and they can't work together. But ultimately, I mean, for example, on a lot of the positions, they're actually in agreement. I mean, for example, let's take an example that resonates quite well in the UK and Germany and even Australia, I think. If you look at the Communist Party in France, they're pro-nuclear. So they have things in common with the majority of the parties in France, with the exception of maybe the Rassemblement National or La France Insoumise. If you look at the ecological topics of Europe Écologie Les Verts, they agree with, let's say, maybe 60 or 70% of the parties in France on the fact that there needs to be work on ecological issues. The question is mostly one of how you actually practice it. And to be honest, in France, we have a lot of parties, but it's mostly nuances of the same thing. It's why you have these big coalitions, for example. So within Ensemble, for example, you have the social liberal wing, which is Renaissance, and then to some extent Modem. You have the traditional liberal wing, which is like Horizon and maybe like slightly conservative liberals. And then you have the slightly more conservative liberals in the UDI and this kind of things. You know, so it's very much, let's put it this way, it's very much the result of the fact that political education in France is quite strong. And people are encouraged to be more politically active than maybe in some other countries, which leads to maybe a slightly more colorful range of parties in France. But ultimately speaking, it's not like you have 20 parties that are going to fight each other permanently, constantly. Broadly speaking, they're actually going to agree on most things. They're just going to have to try to figure out how to work together on certain things and how to build a coalition.
And the fact that there is 2 rounds for each elections helps a lot, because it means you can vote for your party and you know that you will pretty much always find a party that is close enough to what you think. So I would say for Julien, even if Renaissance is not the second round, he believes that Horizon will be there, or the Socialist Party. They are not so apart. Yeah. So, you know, is it really like, I would say, the far left, the far right, and the rest in the middle? You have more Greens there, more liberal and economic issues there, but they can always get along in a way, except Macron now, because he has been in power. And so because he has been in power, people despise him in the rest of the parties. So it's a bit different, but it was the same when Hollande was in power. People didn't want to have Socialist Party anymore and to have any talk with them. And that's why they completely collapsed 7 years ago, because people were like, okay, they were in power, they were awful. You know, it's like every party in power, they collapse and they go back again. Like the result of the Socialist Party was very interesting. they more than doubled the number of the MPs yesterday compared to 2 years ago.
Yep.
So, you know, it's also because of this, what we talked about, parties, tactical voting, but still, they doubled the vote, the number of MPs. So it's, yeah, there is fluctuation, and yeah, not everything is black and white or very clear.
Just to make a quick point as well, it goes back to what we discussed last week, where the president will always have a target on his forehead, always. And this goes back to Charles de Gaulle, this goes back to Mitterrand, Valéry Giscard d'Estaing, Chirac, everybody. When a president's there, he's always going to lose popularity and he's always going to take a hit. Usually the presidents are more popular 10 years down the line once they've been out of power and a few more people have come in than anything else. Like Tristan, I remember you made the example last time that Chirac, when he was in power and just came out, very unpopular. And then when he died, he quickly became one of the most popular presidents that we'd ever had. And I mean, like, I remember with me and my friends, most of my friends hated him because they were all in the left in when they were at Sciences Po, Sorbonne, or whatever. And then when he died, we all ended up on a Skype call talking about him like he was our granddad, you know? Like, it's one of those things in French politics. Like Mitterrand, he came out of power, he was very unpopular, and then suddenly, like, he's quite beloved, you know? It's interesting.
We're always nicer to them when they're out of power. All right, let's talk about the far right. So are we all getting a bit carried away? Because they still did pretty well, didn't they? And isn't one of the worries, and I would apply the UK, what just happened here, was a huge support for reform. And that's Nigel Farage's party, of course. But of course, with the first past the post system, that actually restrained the number of seats they got. But they did get a fairly sizable chunk of the vote share, which is 14%. And the danger is that once people do that once, maybe it's become a normalized thing that they can vote for a party that was more extreme that, you know, maybe 10 years ago they would never have considered. So I want to ask you about that dynamic in the terms of the French. Is that happening? And what does that mean? Should whatever government forms out of this result, if that is ungovernable or it's messy or it's chaotic or it can't deliver in the lead up to the presidential, isn't that very fertile ground for RN?
Yes. So if you look at the numbers of the Rassemblement National, they doubled their votes and almost their MPs, or even their MPs, compared to 2 years ago. So it's massive. Okay, they didn't win. Most people are relieved in France because, as we said last week, institutions will have been in danger more than policies, but institutions will be in danger. But they are still there, and it's a bit like what the next government, French government, will face is exactly like Keir Starmer is facing here. He knows that if they don't succeed for the next election, in Keir Starmer, it's 5 years' time, so that's quite some time. The problem in France, it's only 3 years' time. The presidential election will be in 27. And 27, if so, the main issue that we said last week, it's social issues, public services crumbling, public infrastructure being awful, people being unhappy. Even if it's sometimes much better than in other countries, you always look at what you add and what you don't really compare to other countries. So if it doesn't get better, for sure, Marine Le Pen will be elected in 27. It's the same issue with Rishi Sunak. If in 5 years' time the situation is not better, people will go to reform in mass. So, of course, what to do, and that's why I think there is a big discussion about the far left. They don't want the far left and someone like Mélenchon in power because he will antagonize so many people, and some of his policy are so woke in a way. It's, in fact, people despise him in France because of his woke policies, and it's which perceived as woke or woke whatever. It's not. Its perception is more important. And if he's in power, he will implement and we will focus on these societal issues more than the rest, and people will be like, never we want a government like this ever again.
Julien, your assessment?
I mean, I think it's quite interesting because there's a couple of interesting facts that we need to look at as well. Is that, first of all, if I'm not wrong, there was still quite a lot of abstentions in the French election. So we still had 33.37% of people who didn't vote. On top of that, I agree that what happens next will have an influence on what happens with Marine Le Pen's potential score in 2027, or if she's indicted on the charges related to her funding in the European Parliament, what Jordan Bardella will do in 2027. Because Marine Le Pen could be blocked from actually running for president. And this is an important fact.
Isn't that more dangerous if you're against the far right? Isn't that a more dangerous scenario? Because isn't Jordan Bardella the fresh, nice face
Yeah.
of the RN, and he could get more votes than Marine Le Pen?
Yes,
Yeah.
but he's also he's not as popular as many people assume. And he does come across as more and more constructed as he gets exposed in debates. I mean, in debates, you saw him more and more, and even Le Figaro, which sort of started leaning towards the RN during the last couple of weeks, started asking himself questions like, what exactly is Jordan Bardella doing? Why doesn't he understand his dossiers? Why is he blanking out? Why is he taking 5 minutes to scroll through his phone when he gets a difficult question? But there's an important thing to look at. And I mean, this is maybe reaching a bit, but it's something quite interesting. So, I mean, we know that the RN increased their vote compared to 2022 by about 16.05% in the second round. And this won't necessarily actually translate to a better score in the 2027 election, because despite the fact that Marine Le Pen has quite a lot of popularity, despite the fact that she is fairly popular and so is Bardella, compared to her score of 41.45 in the presidential elections in 2022, there was an 8.1% drop in the total vote share that went to the RN this weekend. And while it's 2 different elections, while it's 2 different topics, you still have to account for the fact that the protest vote is still not as high for the RN as it is in the presidential elections. And you also have to account for the fact that the support for her and the fact that the posters were almost entirely her and Jordan Bardella with none of the actual candidates on them, still didn't translate to a vote that overwhelmingly put her forward. Because if she had received, or if they had received 41.45% of the vote, I think they would have probably not only had more candidates in the first round, but in the second round, probably had more MPs elected as well. And this is something that's quite important to note of just when you think of the mentalities of people. Sure, it's been 2 years, so the situation in Ukraine and the cost of living have had an impact, but there's still quite a few things that don't necessarily make me think that this is entirely advantageous towards Marine Le Pen, in my view.
Interesting. Can I ask, it's very obvious what the drivers are for voters thinking about RN. What are the factors that mobilize the left voting bloc so clearly and comprehensively against RN this weekend? What are people afraid of most? And I'm talking about the ordinary French voter who turned out on the weekend. What are they most afraid of that the RN will do if given power?
There's a lot of fear of the fact that it's going to start rolling back a lot of social rights. And they have a lot of candidates who take some very, very problematic views on things that we take as granted. Like, for example, we've seen some candidates who were questioning, sexual rights of women, or like the position of, let's say, the ability of people to be homosexual in France, or you've had some people who have attacked gay rights, which is quite an important topic for the left bloc. You've had a lot of fear of what it would do to the French economy, which scares lots of people from the center-right and the center. You've also got people like me who may be focused a bit more on foreign affairs, quite scared of what the RN would do to our foreign policy. I mean, for example, you just look at the situation in Russia and Ukraine, and the fact that they tend to be more Orbanites in general, where they are more happy to support illiberal actors like Viktor Orban, Xi Jinping, Donald Trump, and ultimately you have cause for concern across the board. Now, there's something important to note that I'm sure Tristan will probably point out as well in a second, is that the leadership of the RN isn't the same as the membership or as the youth or as some of the candidates, because Marine Le Pen and Jordan Bardella, they take positions that ultimately have developed following the dédiabilisation of the RN that maybe lean slightly more towards the center in some ways, like, maybe not supporting Russia outright, questioning Trump, questioning China. But the problem is that the structure of the RN and also their alliances with Reconquête in several cases lead you to wonder if that's actually honest or not, and if it's maybe duplicitous and it's maybe a front. Because let's put it this way: as the great grandson of a Jewish resistance fighter whose family went through the blender several times, seeing people who are linked to the collaborationist government, seeing a party that descends from that kind of tradition, for me is very problematic. And as someone who ascribes to Republican values, I can't support the far right or the far left for that matter based on what they believe and what they keep saying and what they keep doing, to be quite honest. And this is also something that I think a lot of mine and Tristan's country people can't necessarily do either, because there's a lot of danger that we're not even aware of yet and that we won't be aware of until the RN wins and takes power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's scary to people, you know?
Okay, Tristan, do you want to add anything to that, or do you broadly agree with that?
No, I broadly agree. And well, we've seen with the far right, some of the candidates appeared on TV shows, local TV shows, or in newspaper, or were interviewed by journalists on TV, and they appeared so inept that people are like, "Oh my God, I was gonna vote for this guy.
Yeah.
He couldn't even answer a proper question." Like one of the women said, "No, I'm not racist. Look, my dentist is a Muslim,
And my
so
friend is Spanish.
and my friend is Spanish." So you're like,
This
this
is
how
crazy.
you explain that you're not racist and xenophobe. And
Yeah.
and it's of course it sounds stupid, but it's well. And you had many people like this. So I even saw one guy, he completely blanked out. His opposition, like his adversary, like what do you say? Well, the guy from the center in front of him was asking a basic question about income tax, and he completely blanked. He was like, he froze. And an answer, he was like, you could see in his eyes, he was completely lost. And it's the guy from the TV show was like, okay, let's go to the next question. Because he was like, for 20 seconds, he didn't move. And, of course, it's a snap elections. It couldn't go through the proper selection of the candidates. But some of them are so awful that I think it didn't help them go.
Mm-hmm. Well, we see, I mean, we saw that as well in the UK with Reform and their candidates. Okay,
Exactly.
so final question, because we need to wrap up. But from, I guess, the outside view, France looks a mess. And I'm very surprised at the timing of this, because you're about to host the Olympics and you have a real power struggle going on in Brussels, I think, at the moment, that Macron has been winning until now over Germany. How do you think this affects, one, France's soft power ability to pull off a great Paris Olympics when the country is literally in chaos? And second, Julien, in Brussels, where you're based, does this affect the power dynamic inside the Commission at all, and the influence that Macron may have over how the Commission decides key policies?
One of the funniest things I've heard in the last 12 hours is that a friend of mine who may or may not have links to the Elysee, told me that one name floating about for the French commissioner was François Hollande, which, to be honest, would potentially be the funniest result of this, maybe next to Prime Minister Hollande, because, I mean, come on, after everything those two have been through, I think I would die. But, I mean, for the Olympics, I think it will be okay. We may have a bit more drama, but not that much, to be honest. But Brussels is where it gets interesting, because you have Renew that lost a lot of seats. You have the European Patriots, or whatever those absolute lunatics are calling themselves now, talking about making Europe.
This is Viktor Orban's group, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. The thing that was just formed now, and that's basically a vehicle for the RN, which are going to be fighting for the power in the parliament, and who are going to be the third biggest group. And you're going to have a lot of fighting around this European view. But the fact that the PS and the Greens and maybe even the PSF to some extent do agree with a lot of Macron's positions in Europe means that he's going to have maybe not too much trouble. And same thing with Les Républicains, if they can get François-Xavier Bellamy under wraps on that front as well. The biggest threat is mostly what happens with LFI and the RN, because they can cause some pretty big problems. But again, it depends on whether LFI gets sidelined by their own coalition. It depends on how people start working. It depends on if you have a supply and command, or whatever it's called, agreement between the parties, where you don't have an explicit coalition, but people vote together on certain things, etc., etc. But I think ultimately for Europe, it won't be as chaotic as we think, because still the power on foreign policy, and especially on Europe, falls in the hands of the president, and the president's not going to be losing too much power with the upcoming coalitions.
And for me, regarding, I think, the image of France and the perception of France, I think everybody knows that in Western countries at the moment, it's a mess. Populists are going up, far right is going up, but at least France have shown that the institution was strong enough and people voted them out. And it's probably a big relief for everyone in Europe, I would say, except a few countries. And we're probably happy to have seen the far right going in. But for people, it's like, okay, we were close to the brink and the French people voted against him. So it's probably a big relief. And people showing that people, in fact, are not so extreme. And especially when we know that the US could elect someone who is like, or close to Marine Le Pen, well, you know, it's still showing that French people are not as nuts and chaotic as you might expect.
And on that note, Viva la Republique, I guess we say. Guys, so much fun to talk to you again. Let's reconvene in another week or so when we have a clear idea of how all of this fell into place or not. And thank you so much again for joining.
Of course.
Well, thank you both.